Welcome to this real-world vulnerability analysis explainer. Okay, we've got to talk about some pretty alarming news sweeping through the InfoSec community right now. We're looking at a brand new, highly critical threat, a zero-day vulnerability they're calling Dirty Frag. Look, whether you're running a single server in a closet or managing an entire global data center, this is a topic that absolutely demands your attention today.
The security world is, well, it's practically buzzing with panic over this. There's a warning going around that basically says Linux has another zero-day vulnerability. Hackers are using fragment attacks on Linux, even potentially getting root privileges. And yeah, you heard that right. This isn't just about crashing a server. Hackers are finding sneaky ways to completely bypass standard security defenses to seize absolute, unrestricted control over Linux environments.
So here's our roadmap for this explainer. 1. The fragile Linux kernel. 2. Understanding IP fragmentation. 3. Triggering memory corruption. 4. Hacker seizing root control. And finally, number 5, a defense and survival guide.
Part 1. The fragile Linux kernel. Why does the kernel just keep exploding?
You know, a lot of people have this deeply ingrained assumption that Linux is just inherently, almost magically, secure. But let's look at reality. The Linux kernel isn't just a simple little operating system core anymore. It is a massive, incredibly complex beast with over 30 million lines of code. I mean, it literally handles the entire modern internet. We're talking basic file systems, container runtimes like Kubernetes, cloud infrastructure, massive AI processing, 5G networks, giant data centers, the whole shebang. And because it does literally everything, its attack surface has just grown exponentially. And here's the catch, the inherent trade-off. To keep up with these massive modern demands, the kernel needs extreme performance. It relies on these mind-bending, high-speed architectures, things like zero-copy designs, lockless queues, and asynchronous processing. But extreme performance equals high risk. Sure, these mechanisms are absolute engineering marvels, but they inadvertently create the perfect breeding ground for really complex logical and memory bugs. Simply put, the more complicated the machine, the more ways it can break.
Moving to part 2, understanding IP fragmentation, or, as I like to call it, the puzzle pieces of the network.
Okay, to understand the actual weapon used in this exploit, we first need to see what normal network traffic looks like. Imagine you need to send a large 4,000-byte packet across the internet, but your standard network pipe, which we call the MTU, can only fit 1,500 bytes at a time. What happens? Well, the Linux kernel steps in and mathematically cleanly chops that large packet into perfectly sized puzzle pieces. It sends a 1480-byte chunk, then another 1480-byte chunk, and finally a 1040-byte chunk. Now, the really crucial point here is what happens on the receiving end. This is a process called fragment reassembly. The receiving Linux kernel grabs those incoming pieces, checks their ID and their specific offset, which basically tells it what order they belong in, and temporarily parks them in a memory queue. It just sits there and waits until all the pieces arrive, and then stitches the whole puzzle back together. Sounds perfectly normal and completely safe, right? Well, it is safe until someone decides to intentionally rig the pieces.
Part 3, triggering memory corruption. This is what happens when those fragments turn malicious. Normally, as we just saw, you get correct offsets, properly sized pieces, and a nice clean assembly line. But attackers, they deliberately throw a wrench into this whole process. They completely barrage the kernel with wrong offsets, overlapping fragments, duplicate IDs, and timing races just to scramble the processing order. Basically, they are intentionally trying to break the assembly line.
And the resulting chaos is just devastating. The fragment queue inside the kernel essentially panics. It has absolutely no idea how to handle these contradictory puzzle pieces. And this leads to profound memory pollution. We start seeing severe bugs, out-of-bounds writes, double-free errors, and these really critical use-after-free vulnerabilities. If you're not familiar, a use-after-free is essentially the computer trying to use a hotel room it's already checked out of, which allows an attacker to just slip right in and leave their own baggage. This deep, messy corruption of the kernel's memory space, that is exactly why this zero-day earned the name Dirty Frag.
Which brings us to part 4, hackers seizing root control. Let's break down the anatomy of the heist.
Creating that dirty, polluted memory space is really just the setup. Here's the precise attack flow. First, the attackers send massive amounts of those crafted, overlapping fragments. This instantly creates race conditions, corrupts the queue, and triggers that use-after-free vulnerability we talked about. Now, with the memory broken, they immediately execute what's called a heap spray, intentionally flooding the kernel with malicious data so they can overwrite critical function pointers. Once they've hijacked the system's core logic, boom, they obtain a root shell. They literally just walk away with total, unrestricted administrative control. But you know what's truly terrifying about this exploit chain? It's stealth. I mean, why is this so hard to catch? Mostly because it all happens deep, deep inside kernel memory. Your standard endpoint detection and response, your EDR tools, they rarely have visibility down there. The user space logs are entirely blind to it, they won't show a record of anything going wrong, and firewalls, they struggle to stop it because fragmentation is, like we said, inherently normal network behavior. To a firewall, these malicious fragments look exactly like legitimate VPN, tunnel, or IPv6 traffic. It literally hides in plain sight.
Finally, Part 5, our Defense and Survival Guide. How to go about fortifying your infrastructure. So, how exactly do we fight a ghost in the machine? Well, here are your crucial proactive mitigation strategies. First, and absolutely foremost, you have got to regularly update the Linux kernel. We still see organizations going literally years without updating their kernels, and in this era of exploding attack surfaces, that is just incredibly dangerous. Second, you need to actively monitor kernel CVEs. Pay special attention to vulnerabilities popping up in NetFilter and the TCP/IP stack. Third, shrink your attack surface. If you aren't actively using advanced modules like eBPF or NF tables, just disable them. Don't leave doors unlocked if you aren't even using the room. And finally, implement specialized monitoring that specifically hunts for abnormal fragment traffic, like overlapping pieces or totally incorrect offsets. Ultimately, Dirty Frag is a really harsh reminder of a hidden reality. As the undisputed core of global data centers, the Linux kernel is fighting an endless, daily war against highly sophisticated vulnerabilities. Those standard network packets flowing into your servers, they are far more dangerous than you might think. So I'm going to leave you with this question to reflect on. Knowing what happens when those everyday puzzle pieces are weaponized against you, are you prepared?